Well, I want to start by welcoming everybody. Many of the names I, of course, recognize, from other meetings, and there's new people here too, and I'm delighted to have you. Um, this is a really important information for us all to have. Um, we don't get much choice about how or where or anything about how when we're born. We have no choices about that. But this is something that we do have a choice about. And today we're going to learn what some of those choices are and what our options are. And it's always a personal choice. Everybody has their own opinions, their thoughts, their ideas about what they want. Um, so with that, I will start by introducing first Nancy Simmers. She's an RN, a death doula, and that's kind of a new profession, I think, and I'll let her explain a little bit about that if you don't know what it is. She's also the founding member of VSED Resources Northwest, and that's a local Bellingham nonprofit organization that's dedicated to promoting awareness of and access to the end of life option, VSED. And VSAD stands for Voluntary Cessation of Eating and Drinking. And again, I will let her go into more detail about just what that is. But that's a mouthful, so we'll just call it VSED. For the past 5 years, she's helped coordinate this young nonprofit, which is formed to increase community awareness. And to educate our community about the legal choices that we have at the end of life. We also have Katie Christie here with us today. She's the author of the VSED Handbook, a practical guide to voluntary stopping eating and drinking. I've read it. It's very easy reading, uh, very informative. I would recommend it to everybody. It answers a whole bunch of questions. She's also a lifetime member of VSED Resources Northwest. And today they will both talk about VSED and touch on MAID, which is medical aid in dying, uh, a related way of handling things at the end of life. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Nancy, and it's all yours, Nancy. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm so pleased to be here this morning. My goodness, happy Green Day. This is my only green garment, and I'm looking at all the little rectangles in front of me, and I see a few others who are celebrating the holiday. Do it safely. I again am just very pleased to be here with Kate and present to you um, a little bit about our nonprofit organization that is now 5 years old, but primarily to talk about end-of-life choices. You know, as Mary Lynn has already said, we come into the world, and our conception and our entrance, we don't have so much control over or choices, but we do with our dying. Tiny bit of information about me. I was a public health nurse for most of my 40-year nursing career. I worked with moms and babies and attended probably 1,000 births. It was only after my own parents experienced hospice care and then their own passing that I became aware of the incredible similarities between birth and death. And I have found it helpful to talk about dying and death and choices by by speaking of the similarities with birth. It's quite significant in that they're universal events. They are life cycle events expected in every person in every family. They are physical events. They they both require courage, and some discomfort. Excuse me. Um, and they're transformational. They're transformational for the person who is being born, or the person who is dying, the person who is giving birth, and the person who is witnessing a death. It's transformational for a family. Um, um, so the similarities are significant, and um, in the same way that as a public health nurse, I advocated um, for education and choices in a woman's right to birth, where she wanted to and how she wanted to. I find myself being an advocate for end of life choice, having a say in how I die and with whom I die and where I die and how I die. My aspiration since becoming a death doula is that families prepare for death as enthusiastically and as thoughtfully and as completely as we have done for childbirth. And with that, I'm going to start a few slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kate, who is going to talk specifically about her family's personal experience with VSED. I'm calling it VSED because it's easier to say. It stands for voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. Sometimes the voluntarily or voluntary, it doesn't matter. Same. The the whole I'm going to turn off my glitches here that is allowing dinging. Um, excuse me just a moment. Um, let me just start. Well, let's see.
Share is down at the bottom in the middle.
My apologies, everybody, while Kate coaches me here.
We've all been there with this.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
You see the green button down at the bottom?
I do, but you know, I am sharing.
All right, so
The
now,
slideshow needs to be open on your desktop.
Thank you, Marie. We practiced this.
I would stop sharing for a second. Stop share.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, now try share again. So click the green share button.
You know what? For somehow the thing closed. So let me get it up again.
All right, I'll leave you to it.
Okay, now I've got that open. I'm back to share. You're all getting this experience through me, right? Share.
Would you feel better if I put the slides? Oh, I think you're close to getting them. Okay. Yeah,
Can
there you are.
say that?
On to now
Thank
slideshow.
you all. Thank you so much. This seems to be
No,
no,
slideshow. The word slideshow just below there.
thank you.
A bunch of words. There it is.
What it's blocked by, okay, being recorded. Okay.
Yeah, you need, let's see, the first word is home, then insert, then draw, then design, transitions, animations, and then slideshow
There we go.
and
How's
begin.
that?
There we go.
I thank you all for your patience. All right. So here we are. I guess you know our names, but now. What we will briefly cover, and then I'm so looking forward to a question and answer time with you all. We're we're going to just list the legal end of life choices, and then talk specifically about primarily VSED, but also mention medical aid in dying. We're going to talk about comparisons. I'll then talk about the role of a death doula. I have a single slide about that. And then I'm going to turn this over to Kate, who's going to share her personal experience and her family's experience with VSED. I want to leave you with all kinds of good resources for end-of-life choices, and then open it up to question and answers. And if you would please be willing to hold your questions, just write them down, and so we can have a rousing discussion at the end.
If you want, you could also put your questions in the chat in case you forget, because you think you might forget what they are.
Okay. Big question. Why is it so important to talk about end-of-life choices? It's so important to talk about it early on because talking about important things like death and dying in a crisis is no time to be doing it. We need to educate ourselves about all of the available choices, primarily to sort out our own feelings and make our own decisions about what we would like to do. And once we have made decisions, it's so important to have the conversation with our loved ones, with friends, with family, and make a specific plan, have it written down and shared, parts of it notarized. Have this conversation also with your physician. And then we can better advocate not only for ourselves, but for our loved ones. By the way, you are welcome to have copies of these slides, so you don't need to be taking any particular notes of them. These are the legal end-of-life choices that are available to us currently in Washington State. If a person has a serious illness, they can, of course, have medical treatment within the parameters of our medical healthcare system. It is also our legal right to discontinue any medical treatment or to refuse medical treatment. I understand that the hospices in Whatcom County are going to come and do a presentation for you in the near future, and that will be fabulous because they will be able to talk at length about the importance of palliative care. That is the care that addresses the symptoms related to a disease process that is going on in the body. I see briefly, palliative care is a continuum. It begins with a diagnosis of a disease, and it can end with hospice and death. Hospice, like I said, is um, uh, going to be talking with you. You can ask all kinds of questions with them. VSED Resources Northwest has collaborative relationships with the two hospices here in Whatcom County, and we urge people to participate in hospice and receive their services. Palliative sedation is, let me give you the definition of that. It is sedating a person so they not only are in no pain, but can actually are sedated into their death. And our hospices do not participate in that. I want to be very clear about that. In fact, hospices are continually um, um, working through and fighting uh, uh, um, the idea, the false idea that hospice kills people with morphine. Palliative sedation is possible, but only in the hospital and only with a doctor's orders. And that's a whole nother thing. I won't get into it. I've probably gone too far already. Another legal end-of-life choice, of course, is VSED, or voluntary stopping eating and drinking. And Washington State is fortunate enough since 2009 to be one of the states, one of the 11 states and District of Columbia to have a death with dignity law. We are fortunate enough to have a representative and staff member of End of Life Washington present. And Rebecca, there are 5 slides here
Okay.
about MAID. Would you be willing to
Sure.
vocalize them?
I will. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Everyone, Rebecca Hudson, she's fabulous. And she's going to talk about these next 5 slides.
Hi, folks. Surprise special guest today. So what is medical aid in dying? The sort of legal definition is that it is a lethal dose of medications prescribed by a medical provider to a terminally ill individual who has decision-making capacity upon that patient's repeated request, and then the patient can choose to self-administer this medication to end their own life if they desire. Many people get the prescription and end up not using it, so there's choice at every step of this process. So who uses medical aid in dying? And these statistics are from Washington State, but they are pretty consistent with other states that have laws like ours as well. Most people live west of the Cascades. Most people are college educated. Most people are white. And a lot of our folks have cancer. Then there's neurodegenerative disorders, and then other things. We are doing a lot of work at End of Life Washington to try and shift these statistics to bring access to Eastern Washington and rural areas, to bring access to traditionally medically underserved communities. And we are making progress, but I feel like we still have quite a ways to go. So why do people use medical aid in dying? I think something that is really important is other than the sort of required qualifications for the law, which is that you're an adult, you have a terminal illness with a 6-month or less prognosis, and you have decision-making capacity, you get to choose medical aid in dying if you want to choose medical aid in dying for whatever reason you want to choose medical aid in dying. So people tell us that they use it because of the loss of quality of life, because of loss of autonomy, loss of dignity, fear of uncontrolled pain and symptoms, or financial concerns. And something that's really important is that it really doesn't matter why people are choosing to use our law. As long as they qualify, they meet all the requirements, they meet all the steps, they do have a legal right to access it, no matter what their underlying reasons are. So what is the process of MAID in Washington? And I probably should have said this on the first slide. You'll hear both me and Nancy, if she talks about it anymore, use the terms both death with dignity and MAID, or medical aid in dying. The law in Washington State is called the Death with Dignity Law, but language changes, and our law was written in 2008, and our understanding of language and nuance has changed since then. And really, there are many pathways to a dignified death. VSED is a path to a dignified death. Natural death can be a dignified death. So we don't really use the term death with dignity anymore just because we want to be more inclusive. MAID, or medical aid in dying, is a really more appropriate term because that is really describing what the process is. It is medical assistance in dying. But you might hear all of us kind of go back and forth with death with dignity and MAID because Nancy and I have both been around for a while before people were using the term MAID. So what are the requirements? I had talked about these just a minute ago, but you do have to be 18 years old. You have to be a resident of Washington State. You have to be diagnosed with a terminal illness. You have to have a 6-month or less prognosis. You have to have medical decision-making capacity. And then you have to be able to self-administer the medication. So either drinking it orally, sucking it through a straw, or if you're unable to swallow, it can be administered through a rectal catheter or through a feeding tube into the GI tract. But the patients themselves have to be the one to press the plunger and actually administer the medication. Are there any more slides? Is that the last slide? I lost count.
I think.
Oh yeah, so safeguards in the law. So there are safeguards both for patients and providers. What's really important is that participation is entirely voluntary for everyone, for the people wanting to access the law, for all providers in Washington State. Nobody is required to help with this law. Nobody is required to participate. Pharmacists are not required to participate. Patients' capacity for medical decision-making during this process is evaluated by at least 2 providers, and it has to remain intact throughout. So they make a request to a provider, they have to have decision-making capacity at that time. At least 7 days later, they have to make a second request. They still have to have decision-making capacity. And then often end-of-life Washington volunteers are present the day that they ingest the medication. And we are also checking that they have decision-making capacity that day they actually take the medication. Again, we talked about how they must be able to yeah, that's okay. We'll go back.
I can go back.
They must be able to self-administer. We can help them mix it. We can hold a cup. We can load the medication into the syringe, but they have to take an affirmative action to actually ingest the medication. So they have to be the one sucking it up through a straw, tipping the cup up, or pressing the plunger. They are recommended that they notify their family, their next of kin. It is not required. Qualified patients can withdraw the request at any time and in any manner. They can just stop the process if they want to. They never have to fill the prescription if they don't want to. And then we talked a little bit about those steps. So they have to complete 2 oral requests 7 days apart and provide proof of residency. They also have to sign a written request that is witnessed by 2 individuals.
Okay.
And yeah, unfortunately, and I see this question in the chat too, dementia patients typically are not eligible for MAID. By the time people have 6 months or less to live with dementia, they typically do not have decision-making capacity, and they're often also unable to self-administer the life-ending medication. Dementia does not disqualify you for the law if you have another terminal illness. So if you have dementia and you're still in the early stages and then you get cancer and you have terminal cancer, you can use the law as long as you still maintain your decision-making capacity. But if dementia is your only diagnosis, you will typically not be eligible for MAID. And I see a question in the chat, what medications are used for medical aid in dying? It is a compounded medication that is made by a compounding pharmacy. It is a combination of digoxin, diazepam, amitriptyline, morphine, and phenobarbital. And it was actually created by end-of-life Washington providers to put people to sleep very quickly, and it let them have a really painless death. There is not something that a surrogate decision maker or a durable power of attorney for healthcare can do for somebody. Again, people have to make this choice for themselves and have capacity. So it's not something that you would be able to document ahead of time and then have somebody else act on for you. I know Nancy's going to talk about a lot of other stuff, but I will hang out and be happy to answer any MAID questions at the end of the presentation as well. Or if you put them in chat, I'm happy to answer in chat as well.
Okay. Here's the legal definition of voluntarily stopping eating or drinking, which is pronounced VSED. It's a legal way to hasten death, and it's deliberately chosen, completely voluntary. What happens physiologically is that the person dies of dehydration. Without water, our physical systems, organ systems will fail, go into a failure, and a person dies. Who's most likely to use VSED? people who don't qualify for medical aid in dying, the largest category of folks who choose to be said. That can include the early stages of dementia, other neurological diseases like Parkinson's, ALS, MS, autoimmune diseases, early dementia, unremitting pain, and anticipated unendurable pain. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this slide because there's a lot of information here, but some people find it interesting to compare and contrast medical aid in dying and VSED. And I like to point out that both have 4-letter acronyms, and so it's real important to distinguish medical aid in dying and VSED, not to confuse them. Medical aid in dying requires a terminal diagnosis and prognosis. A person must have a terminal disease for which they die. And as Rebecca just said, the person must be within the last 6 months of life. It requires two clinicians. You know what? The average time to prepare is now in Washington State is 7 days. The average cost is about $800 for the medication at a compounding pharmacy. The average time of death can be anywhere from minutes to hours. No one wakes up. As Rebecca stated, about 1% of the state-reported deaths is the prevalence, and it is clearly defined by law within Washington State. In contrast, there are no specified prognosis or diagnosis that are required with VSED, because it is totally voluntary. It takes a whole lot of preparation. The cost is expensive because it involves caregiving. If a person takes between 9 days and 2 weeks to die of dehydration, it is recommended that they have 24-hour caregiving, and that's expensive. It is not covered by Medicare, Medicaid, and so families are left with an expense that definitely needs to be taken into consideration. We don't know how many people use this legal end-of-life alternative. There, unlike medical aid in dying that requires physicians to fill out long forms and submit it to the state, there are no records being kept by the state. End of Life Washington, however, is keeping track, and that information has become valuable in terms of showing us that there is an increased interest and use of VSED. In contrast with MAID, there are not state ordinances or laws around VSED. However, there are now the first ever clinical guidelines for VSED that can help direct physicians and hospices to develop their own VSED policies. I want to do a real quick overview of what decisional capacity is. It's a little we think in terms of, at least I grew up thinking capacity meant, well, I know what I'm doing. I've made a decision. I know what I'm doing, and I know the consequences of it. An additional piece of medical decisional capacity is that a person has been consistent over time about their choice. They have, over a period of weeks or months or maybe even years, have considered this and have stated this choice. This is another reason why it's so important to be thinking of end of life choices now. We have when one has capacity and when one can document on such and such a time, this is what I was considering. And then later on the time, you can continue to have conversations with friends and family and say, yep, I'm still wanting this. Let me talk just a moment before turning this over to Kate about my role as a death doula. I have called myself a death doula for about 8 years now. I am not medical. I almost wish at times that I were not an RN with an RN license, because I've had to unlearn some of my Western medical training. I consider myself an advocate for the dying person and for their family. I take a very holistic approach to care. I coordinate with family in in anticipation of a VSED by helping the family um, make all of the preparations for a VSED experience. And Kate is going to go into some of that. So I collaborate and coordinate. During the VSED process, I continually assess not only what's going on with the person who has chosen to VSED, but also with how the family members are doing, and even how the caregivers are managing, not only advocating for the client, but also are they doing good self-care. I like to work with a family on a daily basis to explain what they are observing in their loved one who is doing a VSED process, and to lend my support and caring to them. And of course, with anything that to do with life, there are unexpected things that happen. You know, Aunt Myrtle drops in to say hello at the last minute, and and has questions, or um, uh, any number of things can happen. So expecting the unexpected is always part of what goes on. Before I pass this on to Kate, I want to just make a public and personal show of gratitude to Dick and Jane, who are parents of Kate and who both chose to voluntarily stop eating and drinking to end their lives. They they were not only incredible teachers for me, um, but they helped VSED Resources Northwest financially become started. This is our fantastic logo and our website and a phone number. I want to acknowledge End of Life Washington. They not only are the agency for medical aid in dying, but so please look at their fantastic website, but they also have excellent information about VSED. And this is Kate's book. Many of you most likely know Phyllis Schachter. Phyllis did a TEDx talk about 10 years ago regarding her midwifing her husband, Alan, as he chose to voluntarily stop eating and drinking. She is a VSED pioneer, and later she wrote this book, Choosing to Die, which is another wonderful resource about VSED. This is the Bible, the textbook of voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. And let's see, there are more and more books coming out sharing experiences and knowledge and information about VSED. And now I'm going to turn this over to Kate. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'll push the little red button. And Kate, take over, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm also very pleased to be here. I did go and get my green sweatshirt, mostly because I was cold, but I picked the green one because it is St. Patrick's Day. So I'm going to get started with my slideshow. Here we go. All right. I'm going to move the little box so I can see what's going on. There we go. All right. So I picked this picture. This is my mom. I'm going to focus today mostly on my mother's VSED experience. She had Alzheimer's. She died in February of 2020. So there's been more time. And when I wrote the VSED handbook, it had been about 2 years. So I had processed. My dad died in September, last September. So it's only been about 6 months and I haven't really processed it entirely. So I'll focus on my mom's experience and then throw in some kind of comparisons and contrasts that are evident as we go along. I picked this photo for my mom. This is her in Wyoming, where my parents used to live. I think it's really important to understand that she loved life. And that was a big reason that she chose VSED. She chose her end of life option because she loved life and was fiercely independent and did not want to go into nursing care or memory care for Alzheimer's. So to understand that a little more, let's see. There we go. First of all, who am I? I'm a professional writer. I'm a fiction writer primarily. VSED Handbook was my second nonfiction book. And I'm the daughter of 2 people who chose VSED. I talked to my mom while she was making the decision before she died and said, you know, I feel like I could write about this. And she said, please do. I'd like my story to help others. And so it was kind of the perfect storm of a parent who picked VSED, who had a child who is a professional author and could write about it. So. Okay. All right. So this is a little background on my mom. Over on the right, you'll see my mom's wedding picture. In the middle is her mother, and on the right is my mother's grandmother. So my grandmother's mother. These are 3 generations of women who all developed dementia. More than likely, my mother's grandmother, my great-grandmother, probably had Alzheimer's. My grandmother in the middle was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and my mother on the left was diagnosed with Alzheimer's as well. So there was already a family history of dementia. We had a lot of experience of watching loved ones live to the end of dementia. My mom also had a fierce sense of independence, and she greatly feared a loss of self and family by going through dementia decades before she was diagnosed, decades before she ever had a symptom. She said, do not put me in a nursing home or I will haunt you. And she absolutely meant that. Anyone who knows Jane, she meant it. Her mother had gone into nursing care at a point where she could no longer live safely alone at home. She was in memory care for 7 years. And by the end of those 7 years, she couldn't get out of bed. She couldn't do anything. She didn't know anyone. Her body basically shut down from Alzheimer's. I think a lot of people don't understand that Alzheimer's is a terminal disease. Often you die of something else, pneumonia, but Alzheimer's, if nothing else gets you, Alzheimer's is a terminal illness. And my mom watched her mother die from Alzheimer's, and it was really difficult. My mom, another quote that she said down there on the right, I don't want to die a stranger among strangers. She was really nervous about institutionalization. She had read the stories, the horror stories, and understood that while it's a small percentage that people get abused in a skilled nursing facility, it was a possibility, and she was not willing to take that risk. The other quote at the bottom there, our hospice social worker said to me, you know, Jane didn't choose terminal dementia. She only chose how the final chapter of her story would end. And that was such a great perspective for those of us who loved her, because voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, it's right there in the name, it's voluntary. And so to participate in it, you also have to choose to participate, and you have to choose to support. And that's more of a challenge, I think, than natural death. If someone has cancer and they don't do hospice, or sorry, and they don't do MAID, but they do hospice and they end up dying from cancer, we see that as a natural death, and no one has a choice, right? It just happens. This is what happens. But the thing about MAID and VSAID that can be complex for family members supporting is that there is a choice, and there has to be a choice over and over again, and that can get really complex. All right. The timeline, my mom developed mild cognitive impairment in 2008. The picture at the top there on the left, my parents lived in Michigan. I was born there. They retired to a historic ranch, and you can kind of see down, she's up on the rim looking down at the ranch. So you can see those roads down there, and that's where my parents lived. For 12 years, they retired out there, and they lived there and took care. They were caretakers and ran a nonprofit that did environmental education on the site of this historic ranch. There were no animals. The only animals in the valley there, it's the Wind River Valley, if anyone knows it, near Du Bois, Wyoming. The only animals were the resident bighorn sheep. So there were sheep, but they were wild, and they were awesome. My parents loved living there. However, my mom was thrown from a horse in 2008 in her 60s, and within 6 months, we saw cognitive changes. In 2010, the cognitive changes were enough that she contemplated suicide for the first time. She knew that she did not want to live as her mother had lived. But then in the summer of 2010, my wife became pregnant with our first of 3 kids. And my parents decided, you know what, I think we want to stick around. I think we really want to be there, and we want to be part of our grandchildren's lives. In 2015, they moved to Washington State. I had 3 children under the age of 3 at the time. And so it was beneficial to each family. We were able to help as mom's cognitive impairment increased, and they were able to come over and spend time with my kids, especially because I was still working full time. In 2016, they went to the Death Happens workshop that Nancy mentioned at the Palliative Care Institute at Western. Phyllis Schachter spoke and explained her husband Alan's decision to use VSAID to escape dementia. My mom came home and called me up and said, you have to come over right now. And I came over, it was a Sunday afternoon, and I was like, what's up, what's up? And she's like, I've found the way I'm going to die, Jenny. And I was like, oh, okay, all right. And so that started about a 6-month period of education and planning. And then I'll get into that. And I am going to focus today mostly on the decision-making process. There's a lot I could cover. The handbook goes very much into depth into the experience of our family during VSAID. But for this presentation, I'm going to talk about how did we get to that disease, and what did that look like, or that choice, and what did that look like? All right, why VSAID? They learned also, not only from Phyllis Schachter that VSAID was available, they also learned at that conference in 2016 that Alzheimer's was not a qualifying condition for MAID. That was new information to them. It's often new information when I speak to people. They're like, what do you mean you can't, it's a terminal disease? And people don't understand that statutory requirement of 6 months or less. By the time a person with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia reaches the 6-month or less point till death, they typically do not have decision-making capacity, as I think folks have mentioned here, so that's why. A good thing about VSAID to my mom was, if I change my mind, I can stop. In the first 4 or 5 days before dehydration becomes terminal dehydration, you can change your mind without any outcome. You just say, nope, this isn't for me. I've changed my mind and I don't want to do it. I've heard of stories where folks have started and stopped a number of times before they finally got to the point where they were ready. That didn't happen for my parents. They were both like, get me the hell out of here. So they were like, we're done. But I know that that is an option. And it's a reassuring option for a lot of people, I think, knowing that they can stop if they want to. Suicide is risky and painful for family and first responders. The first death doula that we worked with in 2017 had been an EMT and said it's horrible on first responders and family if you kill yourself in a violent act. It's just a really awful way to go for you and an awful way for your family and the people who are responsible for dealing with it. All right. So 2017, again, she was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment in 2008. So we're 9 years in now. And it's still, I asked her doctor, she died in 2020. He said, you know, she was probably officially had a diagnosis of Alzheimer's for about 4, maybe 3 years. So we're saying 2016 to 2017 is where mild cognitive impairment started to go more into an Alzheimer's diagnosis. Only 50% of people with mild cognitive impairment, those are the stats that I've been told, develop Alzheimer's. My mom, having a strong family history, her mother, her grandmother, her brother, all had Alzheimer's. We kind of knew where it was going. So her planning was, you know, she was making those plans early on. What happens if I get Alzheimer's? In 2017, we met with the first death doula, and at the very first meeting, she said, if done with the doctor's support, on-call nursing care, and palliative medication, VSED can be peaceful and empowering. This was important, less important for my mom, more important for my dad, because he understood that we would be the ones watching her die. And he was very opposed to any suffering and was reluctant, I think, for her to do VSED. So this was really important for him. It can be done without suffering. Then we met with an attorney to get all the paperwork done. And the salient quote from that first meeting that came back in meetings throughout the years, you will have to give up good days to avoid bad years. And that was Erin May Glass, who is our family attorney. And she's a local expert on VSED. You will have to give up good days to avoid bad years. And that was true. And that's one of the difficulties of VSED for dementia. All right, complete the paperwork. We did advanced directives. We did a death plan with the doula. She kind of helped determine what would you like to see during your dying process. Do you want scents of any kind, you know, candles? Do you want incense? Do you want quiet? Do you want a party? Those sorts of things. What kind of music do you want to have playing? So really dove deep into what kind of death do you want? And that's the advantage of having a death doula. They really help you think through all of those questions. She also wrote a VSED statement of intent. And this was with some assistance from the attorney around, you know, what kind of things do you want to cover? It was, and if you buy the book, I actually put it in the back in the appendix area of the book, her actual VSED statement. But it basically was, here's what I determined to be a quality of life. Here's how I've lived my whole life. Here's what I love. And here's what my disease is taking from me. And here is where my quality of life is now and where it's headed. And this is why I am making the choice to hasten my eventual death with VSED. So we did all the paperwork, got it all done, had a whole packet, also includes a post, so your DNR, you're not being revived, resuscitated. We did an advanced directive for Alzheimer's. Now there is a VSED advanced directive. So my dad ended up doing the VSED advanced directive as well. That was new though, last year. We were kind of like, it's still 2017, maybe April, May, we're like, okay, now what? And the attorney and the doula were both like, go live your life until it's time. And I put the word right there kind of a little sarcastically, because like that is just a really difficult decision when you're dealing with cognitive impairment only. With my dad, I can say this now, he had Lewy body dementia. So he had cognitive impairment, but he had severe physical restrictions. It's Parkinson's plus dementia. Honestly, it seemed more like vascular dementia because it was up and down the way vascular is. And Alzheimer's, for my mom at least, was a pretty steady, slow march. For Dad, it was up and down, and he had horrible physical pain symptoms. He couldn't walk some days. And so for him, it was a lot easier. But for Mom, it was like, how do we determine? And so we set some markers. I say we, that's wrong. She set her markers. She wrote down, here are the things that are important to me in life. I want to hike, I like to cook, I like to garden, and I like to read. And when I can't do those things, I would be ready to do VSED. Like when dementia means that I can't do those things anymore, I'm ready to be done. And my dad, who was her durable power of attorney for healthcare and also everything, he was her person. He was like, no, I don't accept that. Like, you're gonna die because you can't cook and you can't read? Absolutely not. And then other family members, including myself, were like, well, you don't get to make that choice for her. And he was like, I do get to make the choice. And it led to these arguments. It led to conflict. And my mom finally was like, Dick, do not separate me from my children. I need them. And at that moment, we were all kind of like, okay, this is for the two of them to decide together. They are the married couple. It is their choice that doesn't involve us at all. And that's kind of where we went from there. My dad actually said to me, I think I'm going to put her into memory care. And I was like, I don't support that. And I have no control, and you'll do what you do. And I had a conversation with my mom, and she was like, I trust him. He's going to do what's right when the time comes. And I was like, all right, cool. It's your life. It's your death. It's your choice. And I'm just going to pull back and just be your kid and hang out. And we're going to enjoy life as long as we can. That fall of 2017, the first doula said, I think it's time, you should do it now. And it caused a huge argument. And we ended that relationship right there. We set VSED aside. Everyone accepted that whatever Dad decided. This was really difficult, I think, for my mom and for those of us who loved her, because she was a bra burning feminist. We marched on Washington for the ERA in the 70s and 80s. I mean, like a huge feminist. So it was really hard to be like, okay, this man gets to decide for you. And yet she was like, we've been married for more than 50 years and I trust him, I trust him, I trust him. And in the end, she was 100% right for that. So we all said, we'll accept whatever Dad decides. We'll live life to its fullest. And we did. And you can see here, this is kind of the pictures. My mom loved my dog up on that top left picture. And Layla, our dog, accompanied her through her VSED and laid on her bed throughout it. It was a sweet relationship. In the middle there is my mom with her two sisters. They were 100% supportive. Her sister on the left, Charlotte, actually came and was part of the VSED process the entire time. It slept in the condo and was there. My dad and I were there the whole times, and Charlotte with her. Her older sister Margaret has a lot of health conditions and just couldn't make it from the East Coast, but was there in spirit and very supportive. The picture on the right, the top is the Bagley Lakes hike up at Artist Point. My favorite pictures of my parents, and that was in 2018. This is after the first death doula said, you should probably die now. And so we had 2 more years, and parts of them were difficult, but a lot of it was beautiful. You see down on the left, we all celebrated New Year's Eve every year, Christmas every year, Thanksgiving every year. We had all these holidays together with my kids. And in the middle, my mom loved going up to Mount Baker, and we took the kids sledding one day, and that was the 2 of us. And then on the right, my parents with my kids learning how to roller skate and all of their protective gear that growing up in the 70s, we definitely didn't have, but they do now, and it's good. It protects them. All right, so now we're moving on, 2018, 2019. Mom's dementia progresses. She was able to set some final markers with my dad's support. Instead of reading, cooking, gardening, it became, VSED begins if, number 1, she no longer knows friends and family. Or, so these are all, any of these is a qualifying marker for her, and that my dad agreed to. Or 2, her relationships with her loved ones begin to suffer irrevocably, or she can no longer live safely at home. In the spring and summer of 2019, her dementia symptoms, the actual Alzheimer's, became a lot more apparent. She was getting lost. She was forgetting people and stories. She was claiming my dad's stories as her own, which always gave us kind of a laugh afterwards. Not in front of her, obviously. She was getting really paranoid about neighbors, about store clerks. She was having a lot of anger, a lot of sundowning, which if you're not familiar with it, it's in the evenings after a day awake. People with dementia, the sundown, as the sun goes down, they became more irritated, more irritable, more confused, more upset. And that was happening a lot. She was having increasing aggression with my dad and with me at times. And we determined that markers number 2 and 3 had been reached, and she agreed. And so it became a question of when. We had some difficult conversations about when. Attorney meetings to make sure she had capacity, talking to the doctor to make sure her choices were still going to be respected and supported, and then setting a date, one more Christmas. And and so that was, once she made the decision, this was September of 2019, she was like, okay, one more Christmas, and then we're going to do it in January. And once she made that decision, she became a totally different person. One of her friends came to visit and said, you've activated your higher self, Jane. And she was so relieved that she had control and that she was not going into memory care for 7 years the way her mother did. So that fall/winter, family came to say goodbye. There's my cousins in the upper left. They're really close. They were really close to my parents. So they all came. Again, her older sister came to say goodbye down there in the left, bottom left. One more Christmas, and those are my parents there in the middle. It was Christmas Day. We came over with my kids and our dog to hang out and do that kind of stuff. And then on the right, that was New Year's Day. My parents were walking hand in hand around Lake Louise, which is out in Sudden Valley where we live. So we walked around Lake Louise for years and years and years with them. Even before they moved here, they would come visit and we'd take the kids and go around. So it's a favorite. It wasn't as easy as making the choice and moving forward, unfortunately. There was a family fracture. Someone in the family who had supported mom's choice for the last 2.5 years, when the date approached, this person decided they no longer supported the choice. They felt that it was unethical. They felt that she didn't have capacity. They had a professional role that they referred to and decided, when my parents very calmly said, no, we hear your feelings, but it's not your decision to make. It's not your choice. We've had this plan for a long time. Attorneys, doctors, everyone says, yes, we're going to go ahead and move forward with it. And that person decided to call the police and alleged elder abuse against me for supporting it. APS got involved. I didn't even make it into a full investigation. They were like, this is a false allegation. We're investigating to a point and then we're tossing it. And then we talked to the doctor. My mom's initial nurse practitioner had said that he would support. He changed his mind. He had a family member die that fall and he just couldn't do it. So we had to go to the Peace Health geriatric doctor. And because it's led by a religious organization, we thought that the physician might not be able to support, but he was able to. Unfortunately, he was investigated because this family member contacted Peace Health and alleged medical malpractice in agreeing to support. It hadn't even happened yet, but and so, as our attorney said, this became the most verified case of VSED by the authorities. There were doctors involved. There was a Peace Health investigation. There was APS, and so it was all, for me, the outcome was, I didn't know much about VSED, and this family member had swayed me with the thought that maybe it's not ethical that someone with dementia does this. And it was really great for me to talk to the doctor and to talk to the social worker at APS and talk to the social worker at my parents' clinic and hear, yes, she has the right. She has testamentary capacity and she has medical decision-making capacity. And so the outcome, while it was a super stressful, awful time, and that family fracture never healed, it's still ongoing. It had a silver lining in that all of us who supported mom and loved her and were moving forward with VSED with her felt really good about that support. It had been tested at every level and she had been found able to make that decision. And people often ask, what stage was she in? And I asked the doctor that before she started. And he said, I would say early stages, starting to starting to go towards middle stages, but still at the kind of late, early stage of Alzheimer's. And that's why she was able to make those decisions for herself, because she still had that capacity. All right, final planning real quick. Let me check my clock and see where we're at. Oh yeah, 11. Okay, good. We want to allow time for, question and answer session. So final planning, January 2020, Nancy Simmers and Andrea Fenwick came on board. They were referred to us from our attorney as the doulas, and Nancy hired a team of caregivers and helped us assemble the family caregiving team, which included my dad and me and my aunt. My in-laws also came. They have a lot of hospice and elder care experience, and they were around to help out with the kids. My wife was a huge help as well. Hospice, we had contacted hospice through my dad's doctor, or my parents, sorry, he was also my dad's doctor. He said, ask hospice. And we said, I don't think hospice does that. And he said, what do you have to lose? So we had contacted hospice and they said, yeah, we can definitely support. By the time she's halfway through visa, she will be in that qualifying period where she is actively dying. And so she will be eligible for hospice once she's actively dying. We had a final visit with mom's doctor to assess medical capacity. And I'll never forget, he said, number one, he'd been asking this question every appointment for a couple of years. Do you understand what visa is? Do you understand the outcome? She's like, yes, death. And is that still your choice? And so again and again, he asked, because this is that long-term period of assessing capacity and decision-making, have your wishes changed, Jane, or do you still want to do VSED? And she was like, it's best for my family and me, absolutely. And I'll never forget, she looked at him and said, it's time to get the show on the road, which was something that her dad always said. So we went to the attorney the week before she started to get the final, again, her testamentary capacity, which is her legal capacity to choose this, had been assessed throughout the years and throughout the 6 months prior. One final visit to say, yes, this is what I want and I'm choosing it. And liability releases were signed. And basically those liability releases were intended to prevent family members or caregivers who are helping out and supporting from any sort of legal challenge. My mom's statement is, this is my choice alone. No one else is responsible for this but me. And then this is a February 1, 2020. This was the first day. She hadn't eaten in a couple days. This picture on the right. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional because they're both gone now. This was their last sunset together, and it's at Zwanich Park, which was one of their absolute favorite places to go. And you can see in this photo how much they loved each other. Neither of my parents was afraid to die. I had lots of conversations with them, and I asked them difficult questions because I'm a writer and that's kind of what I do. But I asked each of them, are you afraid to die, before they started BSED, and both of them said no. And my mom said, no, I'm more afraid of memory care. And my dad said, no, I'm more afraid of being forced to live the way I am now. And so I tell people, for each of them, it was the least bad choice. They were dying. There was no way to escape death. The only choice they could make was when to die and how to die. And they each did not want the disease that they had to put them through suffering for years and years. And for my dad, physical discomfort and suffering for years and years. So, lessons learned. Planning. I highlight that over and over again in the book. Planning is just so paramount, not just for legal reasons, also for legal reasons, but also so that you get to have that sense of control and it can go smoothly. I've heard of horror stories where people were like, I think I'm going to do VSED tomorrow. Oh, okay, let's do it. And they stop eating and drinking with no preparation, no planning, no palliative care, no help. And it's a horror story. When people talk about VSED being horrible, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about people who went into it without understanding what it's like to die from dehydration and having zero preparation or medical assistance. Not always. I guess sometimes it can go sideways for other reasons too. So I shouldn't say always. Let me qualify that. Generally speaking, that's when it goes badly. For our family, it was easier the second time through. Number one, the person who had objected to moms was no longer part of the family and was not part of any decision making, and that was a huge relief. Everyone supported Dad's choice. We had seen it with Mom. We understood the planning process. We knew it was legal. We didn't doubt that, oh, we're going to get arrested if we participate in this. We understood that there was no chance of that. And for Dad, he had such dramatic physical decline. That was a lot easier to take. My mom, the day that she stopped eating and drinking, she and I went for a walk, and one of our neighbors had this little like gnome out in front of their condo, and she like posed next to it like ha ha ha. Like she was herself. She was telling jokes. And 10 days later she was gone. With Dad, the day he started, he slept on his couch for like 4 hours that day because he was so ill. He couldn't even get up. And so that was a lot easier to watch someone go through 9 days of VSED when they were already so weak and so ill, like physically, not just cognitively. One thing I've definitely learned, I'm actually going to reverse these two. VSED accelerated my parents' disease process. I had this epiphany in like the middle of my mom's VSED experience where I was like, wait a minute, she's going through all the stages of Alzheimer's death right now, but instead of 7 years, it's taking 10 days. So that's why we say hastened death. It takes it and it compresses. Death is hard. You're going to suffer. I mean, there's no way to have a pain-free, suffering-free death. You can make sure it's very limited pain and suffering, but death is always going to be hard for the people watching and the people going through it. But it took her 7-year memory care potential death and shrunk it into 10 days. And that was such a gift to her and such a gift to those of us who loved her. And the same for my dad. He had months to years ahead of physical and mental suffering and anguish. And he missed my mom. And so 9 days he was with her again is how I felt. He was going to die no matter what, and he was going to die painfully and badly from Lewy body dementia. That one is a rough one. And so, yeah, so it just accelerated their disease process. Loss of control. VSED allows a sense of control, not only literally a control, but also a sense of control. I've given presentations to people before, and one woman with Alzheimer's, I remember early stages, she came up and she said to the team that I was presenting with, she said, this has given me more relief in one night than I've had in 1 year of thinking about what am I going to do about Alzheimer's. Whether or not a person ever uses VSED, it allows a sense of escape from something that is before that inescapable. You cannot escape dementia, people think. But here is a way to take control, whether you use it or not. I think they said that about MAID as well. People don't always use MAID, but they have the option. And that's really what it's about, is a choice that allows you a sense of control. And I think, oops, sorry, I just did the wrong button. And let me share it one more time because I had one more thing here. Sorry. I'm gonna do it this way, and sorry guys, I hit the wrong button and did something to my crazy. Let's move this. God, everyone's having the problems today. Okay, never mind. I'm just gonna go down here and show you the last slide. Sorry, everyone. All right, there we go. Come on, dude. Come on. All right. Thank you for your time. This is our website and my email if you need anything. And now I am going to stop the share, and I apologize for that complicated ending. I hit like a weird key and all of a sudden it was gone.
Thank you so much. That was a really moving story, and I think really illustrated what VSED is and can be. Very, very helpful. There are a number of questions in here. What would be the best way to do this? Can you see the chat, and do you want to go through you and Nancy, do you two of you want to go through the questions? Or and Rebecca, there may be some in there that you would be best able to answer. Would you like me to read them?
Yeah, Marilyn, my suggestion would be that you facilitate. And
Okay, let's see if
we can respond.
I think most of the questions in the chat have been answered at this point. There's
What I'm seeing.
yeah.
Is everybody able to see the chat? And actually, I'll save it. And when this information is put out on the website, the chat will be there along with the presentation. There is one last one, a new one. And I think this is a question for you, Kate.
Yeah. Yeah, so it says, Kate, that was an incredible story and slideshow. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you for listening. Would you choose VSED for yourself? I'm in my early 50s and I have tweens and teens, so it's hard for me to imagine that. I think I would use it for dementia, and I'm hopeful that I don't have early onset. I would choose MAID for sure if I had cancer. I've known friends who have and friends who haven't with cancer, and I've watched some painful deaths. I think I would choose it, but again, as a parent of young children, it's really hard to say. One of my really good friends died of brain cancer, and he had a 5% chance of beating it. It was one of the bad ones, and he fought it valiantly because he had young children. His kids were the same age as mine. So ask me in 20 years, and I think my answers would all be a little bit different. So I will say, it's illustrative to me that my dad picked it after watching my mom do it. So I think that might be a better answer is my dad watched the love of his life escape dementia using VSED, and then when he had his own Lewy body dementia experience, that was his number one go-to. And he was really nervous about having that choice taken away. He was very, very important to him to say, I need to be in control and I need to make this choice. And I see VSED as a way to get out without suffering. So maybe that's more illustrative than anything.
Is there anyone else who has a question that they would like to, either a question that they put in the chat that hasn't been answered, or another question that has occurred to them as we've been going through this? I'm going to try to.
Looks like Elaine
Read
might
this.
have a question.
Yeah, I do. Just a quick one, about the, not the VSED, but the MAID. Can you, are shots, you mentioned a syringe at one time, but then at another time you just mentioned drinking, or I think you said, anyway, is there, shots available for the, death with dignity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sorry if I was not clear. So the syringes are used if somebody is ingesting through a feeding tube or through a rectal catheter. So you would attach that syringe to the tube and press that plunger. The law in Washington State and all of the US that has these laws is it has to go into the GI tract. So it cannot be injected via a syringe or injected intravenously. It either has to go through the mouth, through the rectum, or through a feeding tube. It has to go into the GI tract. I saw some people talking about Canada in the chat. Canada does allow IV administration, so that's a difference between our laws.
Thank you. Okay, that's great. I really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
And I just saw a question in the chat about, is the advanced VSED advanced directive available on End of Life Washington website? I think they have a link to it, but I just put the link into where it resides, and that's washingtonlawhelp.org. So it's there in the chat. So that's a very good question. There was a team of about, I want to say, I forget, 5 or 6. If you open it up, it lists who was on the National VSED Advanced Directive Committee, and it's a group of attorneys. One is our local Erin May Glass, who's wonderful, and Lisa Burdoff is also a Washington person as well.
Nancy, you may want to also say something about the development of the clinical guidelines, because that's made a big change as well since Kate's first experience and her second experience.
I was just going to jump in and say that, as I mentioned with the slide there are now clinical guidelines for VSED that are available, have been published and are available for clinicians. And it is the link to the Journal of Pain and Symptom Management, the journal that published those guidelines, is available on our website.
And I just put the link in the chat there. It's jpsmjournal.com.
Great. I would suggest that if you are considering voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, that you open the link, print out the guidelines, and take it to your physician. Any other questions?
Yeah. Nancy, as a death doula, have you found it difficult to find physicians to work with a family?
Yes, I have, and that's why I recommend educating your physician about it. Yes.
And also, I would say it's probably easier for physicians who've been told of the choice well in advance. As long as my mom had told her doctor a couple of years in advance, and it wasn't until he was investigated by Peace Health and given a green light to support that he felt really comfortable doing it.
And another reason for doing all of this planning way ahead of time. Start the planning now, step by step.
Elaine, I think I saw your hand up
I'm
briefly.
sorry with another question, but this repeating requests was one day, somebody mentioned 7 days later. I mean, every year, every 6 months, how often? Mine's already on file with Peace Health, but every doctor you see, you mention, hey, by the way, I mean, how often do we establish this in writing?
Yeah, so for medical aid in dying, you can't actually start the process legally until you have a terminal illness with a 6-month or less prognosis. That is the time when you would make your first request, start the process. So that it's not something that you can like put on file. You can talk to your providers about it ahead of time and let them know it is a choice that you might consider if you were diagnosed with a terminal illness, but you can't actually make the request or start the process until you've been given that terminal prognosis and have a 6-month or less diagnosis. Then you go through the process, get the prescription written. The prescription can stay on file at the pharmacy for up to 6 months and can be renewed if you hit that 6-month mark and are not ready to use it yet.
Elaine, if I might add on to that, perhaps you're speaking of planning through an advanced care plan or an advanced directive. You can complete in an advanced directive. Please complete your advanced directive. Share it with your physician as well as your family, and you can mention in an advanced directive that you would use medical aid in dying if you had a terminal disease. Does that help?
Yeah, and in terms of assessment, my mom's doctor, she, towards the last 6 months, as she was actively planning, she knew she was going to be doing VSED at some point soon. That was the once a month he would ask the question, are you still thinking that you want to do VSED? Do you still understand what that entails? And she would say, yes, it will lead to my death. And that was the demonstration. So every time she had an appointment, he just asked. It wasn't like, I'm of course looking back in hindsight and saying, oh, he assessed that every time. But at the time it wasn't clear to us, oh, he's assessing it every time. It was only in hindsight that was really clear. And then I also saw, does Dory Belisle, it looked like she had a question?
I thank you. I did have a comment and a question. I experienced VSED without knowing the terminology or what was going on. So this has really brought great information to me. I experienced death with a great friend who was 105. And she was in independent living until the last 6 weeks of her life, went into assisted living and told everybody this was it. She was done. She was ready to go. Falling, she ended up in the emergency room at the hospital, and that's when hospice was brought in. And she kept asking the doctors for help in dying. which was made, only she didn't qualify. And all the doctors just kind of brushed her off and said that they can't do that because it's St. Joe's Hospital. So she was getting really frustrated until one doctor said, well, you know, Mildred, you have a choice. And he explained about eliminating water and food. I was with her at that time, and she just became so relaxed, so calm, and said, Dory, I'm ready. And so I went with her to hospice. The first thing she said to the beautiful director that came in was, I don't want any food or water brought into my room. And the director she was great. And she said, no problem, Mildred, we'll honor your wishes, but just know that there is water and food available if you want it. And, you know, between me and her niece, we stayed with her, and it was peaceful, and she was content, and it was wonderful. And again, I wanted to thank you for giving me the instructions on how to do it.
That's
So
such
it
a
was good.
beautiful story. That's a wonderful story. I'm so glad she got to have that choice. Do you happen to remember who the doctor was by any chance?
No, I don't.
No. Okay. Yeah,
No.
I'm curious. We educated the Peace Health staff quite a bit, and they have been wonderful in their assimilation of the information, and now they're helping other people with it. And at one point, my mom and dad's doctor said to me, "Thank you so much to your mom, because I never knew anything about this, and I'm so pleased that now people have choices." So.
Were there any other questions? I'm flipping through here, seeing if there's any hands raised, and I'm not seeing any right now. If questions occur to people later on, the information on how to contact you is in there. Is that all right? Can they?
Absolutely.
Great.
And also then,
Mary
And
Lynn,
I always talk about best questions many hours after the presentation.
yeah, and the
Mary Lynn,
handbook has a lot of information about the actual process, and everything I touched on briefly here is most of it's in the book and in a lot more detail. And also there's a place at the back of the book where you can write notes, which I did basically for after my mom died. I was like, oh man, what could I have really used? And so I tried to produce something that is useful for families. When they're facing these decisions, and all the paperwork that you need is listed, all this, all that. So
Mary Lynn, may I jump in?
Oh, absolutely.
No, just one other thing. I when I met with, I want to tell the group that when I met with Mary Lynn and Kim in preparation for this presentation, one of the things that Mary Lynn said to me was, Nancy, this is a group of activists. These are strong women who are doers. They gather all kinds of information and then they do things with it. And would you please consider making an ask? And so I have asks of you. Would you please help us further the education of our community about end-of-life choices and how important it is to think about these choices and have conversations early on with family and friends, and have these conversations with one another. It's so uh, encouraging to have conversations with friends within this group about what it's like to be thinking of end of life choices, because you don't make those decisions right away. It takes a lot of emotional and intellectual processing. I also, as a coordinator of VSED Resources Northwest, have a request around. We need a volunteer attorney to help us with some bylaws. If you know of someone who might fit that bill, would you please let us know? And another request is that that an associated group of caregivers and death doulas who collaborate with VSED Resources Northwest is looking for a place in Whatcom County for people to die. A place that's not hospice, that doesn't offer caregiving. It is simply a beautiful home where individuals and their families can gather to either use the medical aid in dying medication or to reset with their caregivers. Um, I'm just putting that out as a request. And VFed Resources Northwest can also use um, ideas for funding, or if you know of someone who loves to do fundraising, we would so appreciate volunteers who would help us do that. We're planning to have a fundraiser um, sometime in the next 6 months. So if we'd love to invite you, we'd love to invite you all. So I'll most likely be putting that into your newsletter. And I'm a new member of the League of Women Voters, so I hope to see you all again soon.
I think you were talking to the right group. Yes. And this is very, very needed and appropriate information. And it was presented so well. This is, and it will go further than just the 40 some people that were here today, because it will be out on the website. Typically it's 3 to 4 days, something like that. It will be out, there, and I will make sure that the websites that you've put in here, the chat is also available to people. I want to express my deep appreciation to all of you for coming. This was excellent information, and it's information that will not be forgotten. This is really meant a lot to us. Um, it- as you might have seen as you look through the little boxes there, most of us have kind of gray-white hair. This may be something we need to consider in the future, and we need to think about it. And even those who aren't thinking, who may not be thinking about it in their near future or nearer future, we have family who are maybe using this or may need to consider this, and we want to be prepared and understand. We deeply appreciate what you did, coming here today and talking to us about this.